There's still people entering, but try to get started on time. After that helpful tip from Marty Blake about how to turn
Yeah.
off notifications. So welcome everyone to the School of Art Visiting Artists Lecture Series. Tonight we are really excited to have Chelsea Saunders with us. Next week, Ellen Mueller, who's an interdisciplinary artist, will be our speaker. Please ask questions and make comments in the chat, and you can do this both on Zoom and on YouTube for those of us joining us on YouTube. I want to thank Marty Blake for inviting Chelsea to speak with us tonight. Chelsea Saunders is an illustrator and animator. Her political cartoons have appeared in the Nib and in Current Affairs magazine. She's currently working on her first graphic novel with Little Brown Books about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Her 2018 illustration titled The Campus as It Exists in the Mind of a US Conservative went viral last year. And with this amazing satire, Chelsea managed to make fun of both the left and the right. And I suggest you all search for it on Twitter. There's a really interesting Twitter trend that came out of that.
Yeah.
Chelsea received the 2019 John Locher Memorial Award for cartoonists under 26, whose work demonstrates both clear opinions and strong artistry on political and social topics. In an essay by Sarah Rose Sharp on hyperallergic, Chelsea said, given the state of the world today, I find political satire extremely therapeutic. It provides an outlet for the frustrations I have with ineffective government, classism, racism, and the like. Tonight, Chelsea will be sharing her work with us, as well as her knowledge of trends in political cartoons. I'm really honored to introduce Chelsea Saunders. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that intro. It's so great. It's really great to be here tonight. I'm excited to talk with you all. I don't even need this intro slide because I already had a great intro. But yes, my work focuses primarily on political cartoons and as well as editorial and sometimes animation. So let me start by giving you a brief overview of my personal journey into the world of political cartooning. I've been drawing since I was 2 years old. I would draw whatever I could see. So SpongeBob SquarePants, the Powerpuff Girls, I'd be drawing that all down. And by the time I was 12 years old, I realized that I wanted to be a professional illustrator. But that wasn't in the cards because my dad actually had a really funny saying. And he used to go, well, you can choose from 3 careers, doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And so after watching a few episodes of Grey's Anatomy, I decided that I was going to be a doctor and major in neuroscience. And I did that for 2 years. But to no one's surprise, I just found out it was not for me. And so I graduated with a degree in advertising, and I taught myself the Adobe programs in order to try to get a job in graphic design. So in 2017, I was drawing eyes, I was drawing hands, pretty much anything I could. I used pretty basic websites to teach myself like perspective and things like that. And at a certain point, I got up the courage to leave my full-time graphic design job and start working full-time as an artist, which is pretty rad. And in 2018, that is when I made my first political cartoon. And I remember it was in the summer of 2018 specifically because all of these racist incidents were occurring. And these are just some of the incidents that were just being constantly shown on the news. And specifically the story of Barbecue Becky, just a white woman who called the cops on a Black family grilling in California, was really influential to me. And essentially it's a story of, a Black family grilling, a white woman like crying on camera, pretending to be very scared. And she complained that this family needed a permit in order to be grilling in the park. which was just kind of strange considering that other families had grilled there in the past without a permit. And looking back, it's kind of strange now to note that this moment in particular is what radicalized me politically, out of all things in my life, because from a young age, I was always being told that as a Black woman, I would have to work twice as hard, or, there was going to be stereotypes against me and things like that. But I feel like I was always, generally in tune with political injustices. Like I knew that they were occurring, but it wasn't until then that, the anger started to really fester and come out because Black people were just being punished for living their life. So I decided to make a cartoon based off of that. It's called Lowlights for Children. And, I spent weeks just kind of ideating on this. And it's almost, I took a lot of inspiration from Where's Waldo, obviously. And the whole point was, can you spot the 5 scenarios of discrimination? And I took those news articles and the examples of racism that I saw on the news and put them in this piece, just kind of to highlight like the absurdity that, grilling in the park, or, someone being taken down from the graduation ceremony, 2 men being kicked out of a Starbucks, how absurd that those things were. And so once the NIB published this piece, it led to a lot of really cool opportunities with them, such as, most of the time it was short form comic strips, but occasionally I got to work with a writer. And it was a really awesome collaborative effort because oftentimes writers will come in with an issue that they're super passionate about. And maybe it's something that I know nothing about, but because it's a collaborative effort, I get to, learn about a certain topic. I actually did I think it was a 31 panel comic about the history of abortion. That's something that like I never really did research on my own for. So it was just great, working with other artists who were passionate. And so this Where's Waldo's image specifically led to an opportunity with Current Affairs magazine. It's a socialist magazine, or, leftist politics. I'm not sure if it's socialist, but it is left-leaning politically. And the main editor at that magazine, Nathan Robinson, he requested, hey, can we do a the 7 Sins Circles of Hell piece, which was so fun to work on. And here you can kind of just see his idea and the writing of that editorial team brought to life. And I'm pretty proud of this piece because I think this is the first piece I did for Current Affairs. And you see Alex Jones in the layer 3 of hell, the FBI and the NSA is on the very, very bottom layer. So that was pretty fun to draw. It took about at least a month, I want to say, and like a month where I had no other projects going on too. So it was a lot. Here's another one I've done for Current Affairs. This one's not as Where's Waldo-y, but certainly an awesome experience to make. Pretty much they're just calling out conservative grifters like the Koch brothers, and Charlie Kirk is one of the gingerbread boys in the beginning, or he's not a gingerbread boy, but he's the child at the beginning of the maze, being introduced to all these famous grifters. And this is the piece that I am most proud of. The campus is seen through the eyes of a US conservative. So this piece, the writers of the magazine, wanted to make a satirical jab at, how conservatives thought liberal college campuses were. So you have like kids, holding hands around a Mao Zedong statue, things that, it's just pushing reality, pushing the idea that conservatives believe the college campus is just a safe space for leftists. And this image didn't blow up until a year later, because of, what is it, the Cuck Zone bar at the back of all things. So that was pretty hilarious. And originally, when this was posted online, I actually posted it online, on Reddit, I think. It had the original title on there. And I think it was through some conservative probably did it, but they photoshopped out the title. And you could see at the top that where there was space for the title in the blue sky, it's gone. And that was shared widely by conservatives. And I think Steven Crowder even shared the image to his website. And there was a lot of comments like, oh my God, this is exactly how a college campus is. Look at the safe space, yada, yada, yada. And then people on the left started picking up on it and was like, oh my God, this is the college campus that I really want to go to. There's nothing wrong with this campus. So in this case, it was just an interesting example of how both sides of the political aisle latched onto an image, without that being the original intent. So yeah, this one definitely got a lot of press, and it is very rad and one of my proudest moments. So I think I'm gonna, go into, from my journey, lead into some tips and tricks that I've picked up, just throughout the I think it's only been 4 years that I've been doing this. But throughout those 4 years, I picked up on some tips. So this is probably very straightforward. It's about so if you want to be a political cartoonist, then it's just obvious that you would fill your portfolio with political cartoons or vice versa. And if, let's say, Michelangelo wanted to pursue graphic design, but his portfolio was just filled of sculptures and paintings, then I would suggest adding to his portfolio even mock-ups of posters, mock-ups of websites, things that would lead him to secure a career in what he really wanted to do. And I actually did that a lot at the beginning. Even when I had no clientele, I would go to pages like the New Yorker, and I would screenshot an image where an article was paired with an illustration, and then do my own version of that, and then show them side to side, so that if a client ever were to look at my portfolio, they would say, oh, okay, I see that this is your interpretation of how you would do a style for us. The second piece of advice is don't be afraid to reach out to artists. I actually did this a lot when I started as well. I just was nervous that, like, why am I bugging an artist? Like, are they even going to read my email? Am I going to come across as like some kind of stalkery creep, right? But that is totally not the case. Artists do not bite. I've had plenty of people reach out to me in the past, just asking questions, what organizations are you part of, et cetera, et cetera. And I've even had artists, agree to grab coffee with me, obviously pre-COVID, but which I thought was pretty incredible. Like that they went above and beyond to try to help a fellow artist. And I just really feel like just the artist community in general is very kind, very helpful, and willing to help people out. And through talking with other artists, I was made aware of certain organizations that, if you're looking to get into the political cartoon industry, are just very, very, they're very helpful, and I encourage you to check them out. So, as said in the introduction, I won the John Locher Memorial Award, and that's for artists 18 to 25. I think they extended it to 26, who just make political cartoons. They show a strong political voice in their work. And I wouldn't actually have heard of that award at all if I hadn't reached out to another artist who had said, hey, I remember you reaching out to me about a year ago. I think you should apply for this. So you never know when connections like that are going to be made, because they just happen randomly. Oh, and another point about these organizations, I've also found that the political cartooning world is fairly small. So a lot of artists, let's say in the AAEC, are also part of the Overseas Press Club, and vice versa. So it's a small world. I think I highly encourage you to check out these organizations and just reach out to artists in them, ask them how they got started. Okay, so the next piece of advice is that imposter syndrome is normal, completely normal. I go through it all the time when I'm creating a piece, whether or not it's a personal piece or if I'm getting it published through the nib or whatever. And there's plenty of times where, even midway through a drawing, I'm like, is this good? Is this politically on point? Is someone going to come at me for saying, oh, this is a bad take? Like, you need to rethink this. And that's, as a political cartoonist, it's constantly going through my mind. Like, can someone take offense to what I'm saying? Are they going to take offense for the wrong reasons, etc.? But at the end of the day, you can trust your gut, and you're ultimately going to be following what's best for you. And I actually made a comic about this. Actually, specifically, it's about imposter syndrome as it relates to social media, because I found that over time, I was correlating likes on Instagram and shares with good art. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into, especially when you're thinking, oh my God, I have to cater to the people that follow me. People are responding so positively. And it's natural to want to, keep your followers happy, which is not always the case. You have to really remind yourself that you're making the art for you. It is your politics. It is your emotions that you're trying to get out there into the world. And you're not really there to please people. So this is my comic on that. Yeah, and also, who can compete with dank memes? Yeah, it's very difficult. So the next piece of advice is your art style will change. A lot of people have asked, like, why don't you stick to a specific art style? Why don't you have a certain set of colors and palettes that you rely on for your work? And I would answer that my style changes depending on the project I'm working on. For example, I did a series of Christmas card type things, and I wanted that to be more painterly. I wanted that to reflect the warmth of just a classic Christmas card. So I did that style. For the middle one, this was a really, really long form scroll comic. And I wanted to experiment with a more graphic style, something that I don't normally do in my personal work, but I thought that would be the most impactful for that project. And then the last panel is actually, I would say that is my default style, I guess you could say. And I use that style especially when something, the deadline is tight and something is due really quickly. Because I find that, I can knock art out really fast when I'm doing it this way. But, if I have more time to be experimental, then I will. And I think, maybe the one downside to that, to me not picking a style, is that people could potentially go on my page and be like, well, what kind of art am I going to get from her for this project if, it's not consistent? But I actually haven't really had a problem with that, especially with clients, because they'll say, hey, I really liked your Where's Waldo work. Can you do that for us? Or, hey, I really like your Christmas card work. Could you, do a version of that for me? So I've personally found that there's not really a problem with me, changing my style up. And I highly recommend being experimental yourselves. So as a political artist, I would also say ethics and ethical cartooning, ethical art is super important. And, for example, like, would I sell out and, do illustrations for Amazon and, the Amazon warehouse after lampooning them in a comic? I probably wouldn't, right? If my politics are very clear through my art, and if I did do work for Amazon, I would definitely be called out, and not just that, it would just be it would just not coincide with my personal morals. So generally I tend to think about who I work for. What is the content of the work? Is the corporation asking for BLM content actually pro BLM, or are they actually, trying to just jump on a movement, right? Things like that I ask myself all the time. And more recently, the case for, NFTs is another huge example, like the non-fungible tokens that are attached with blockchain tech. That's another thing where artists have had to make that ethical choice. Do I do NFTs despite the tangible environmental impact? Or, do I follow my morals and not partake because I'm not going to put my finances over my morals? So, it's a balancing act between those things. Personally, I don't partake in NFTs, but I do know other artists who do. And they try to say like, hey, it's out of my hands, but it is technically making a political choice, inadvertently or knowingly.
Thomas and Jenny are already skipping vowels.
So the last tip is take time to recuperate. And this is really, really important because honestly, drawing is a very physically intensive task. I find that, my hand, my back, my shoulders, if I'm working too hard, they're definitely in pain. So I highly recommend this book, Draw Stronger by Creota Wilberg. It certainly helped me out. And, taking breaks for your mental well-being. Like, I know this is just an obvious general point, but it's something that I didn't listen to at the beginning because I was just so desperate to get gigs. I was so desperate to get gigs that I would just work hours and hours and hours without breaks. And like physically, I suffered for it. So this is a huge one for me personally that I just want to share with you guys since you're starting out in the field. But yeah, pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind throughout your art process, because it's very, very important to take it into consideration. And so the next segment of my talk is about the expanding world of political cartooning. When I first started out, like, I never thought I was going to get into political cartoons. In fact, the art that I made in 2018, the first thing I made in 2018 for the nib, I don't even think I saw it as a political cartoon. I just saw it as an illustration because in my mind, in textbooks and stuff like that, this was the image that I saw. I wasn't thinking, oh my God, like I'm making a political cartoon, because there was no cross hatching when I was drawing. There was no labeling when I was first starting out, as you see in like these original kind of works. And cross hatching and labeling are things that are still being used. But I think that the world of political cartooning is really opening up, really changing into something that, just includes more type of visuals. And it's not limited to print, ink, and paper like it was in the old days. Now that we have digital works, It's just opening a lot more doors for more people who are trying to go into this field. And don't get me wrong, syndication and magazine publishing and print they're still alive and well, but they are waning. So I think, there's new things coming about, new ways to get around the print industry. And here are some examples of that. So another person, Sarah Merk, who worked for the Nib, she uses zines as a way to express herself politically. And it's someone who, at first I was like, is this political cartooning? This is not the original, one panel or a couple panels, couple panel format that I was used to, so people like her are really pushing the boundaries, I think, of what this could be. And then you have Matt Bors, who I worked a lot with for the Nib as well. He did a lot of, syndicated work, a lot of work for print, but also is now pushing into digital. He's actually retired from political cartooning now, which is sad for me, but I guess great for him in some ways. But yeah, so this is a more like traditional take. When I think of a political cartoon, I kind of think of this. And then you have, totally off bounds, this type of work, street art, and this is, this year was the first year that I was not introduced personally, but found this person's art. And I was just blown away at how, they use a totally different medium to communicate a political message about quarantine, about how poorly the COVID situation was handled in their country. So they're in Australia actually, but even though they're in Australia, all over the world, you're gonna see different. You're gonna see the same ideas pop up everywhere, and COVID being a huge example of, no one is happy with the way it was handled. It was, and everyone can relate to this, right? So yeah, I just think no matter how you show your message, whether it be through street art, zines, or what have you, or animation, which is, my shameless plug, I guess, no matter how you go about it, you can still have a very poignant message in your work that doesn't have to be like the old days magazine type work. Oh, and memes. So I thought this was very, very interesting because I remember having a conversation with a political cartoonist about this. Essentially, we were kind of lamenting, I guess is the best phrase. We were lamenting that, we're in the cartoon industry, and if breaking news happens like that, it'll take, at least a couple of hours to think of a concept and then to draw something based off of that. But with memes, you could just slap, a format together and be just as hilarious and just as poignant. Which, are memes political cartoons? That's kind of open to interpretation, but it's certainly an interesting medium that I've been looking into, just because of how prolific they are, just because of how easy it is for, the everyday person who may not even be an artist to get involved in the political sphere. And it's just so relatable, in a way that political cartoons can be relatable. It's all satire. It's all the distilling of a political idea into the barest form. And yeah, it's just interesting to see where political cartoons are going. I just think, there's a lot more to see. And, with that, I would just say now's the perfect time to get involved. It's just politics will always be there. It's always the same kind of ideas. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. There's racial injustice everywhere, internationally. And so, it's never a field that's going to die out. There's always something to be outraged by, which is a really, really sad truth. But it's a realistic view to have. And whether you do political work occasionally just for cathartic reasons, and processing reasons, or you're trying to get into the game professionally full time, it doesn't really matter. I just highly suggest everyone to get involved and have their voices heard, because especially people saying like, oh, all this fake news, everything is biased. It's like, yes, everything is biased, which is why I think it's great for people to be involved and be a part of it, so they don't feel like they're just at home being left out. So yes, that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I don't know if there was any questions that you wanted to ask.
Definitely. Thank you so much. We're getting several of them in. Let me see if I can find one to start with. Could you talk a little bit about how you got started? There's a question about did you get, you talked about how you just drew everything. The question is, were you always interested in making political cartoons, or did you pursue illustration first?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So the honest answer is that I kind of fell into it. I fell into political cartooning. So originally, I had this goal of just doing just editorial general illustrations for magazines and stuff like that. And then on a whim, I did that political illustration, and it felt so amazing and so good to get it out there that I just kept doing it, and I kept going, and that evolved into an actual career. But no, I did not start out wanting to be a political cartoonist. It found me, I guess, which is cliche, but true.
Let's see. There's another question. Can you elaborate on making art for you, but also getting your art out into the world? This is from Julia. Do you notice that people will just naturally gravitate to your art if it's coming from your heart? In our media-driven world, what do you find the best way to get your art out without using social media?
So let me just answer the first part of that, I guess. I would say, yeah, I think people were gravitating to my work just because of the message. I wasn't really catering to anyone. It was pretty much like what I believed is what was put on paper. And ultimately, I think people really resonated with what I was saying. It's kind of like a tale as old as time scenario where it's like, yeah, the rich suck, and people could get behind that, and, being open and honest about my politics also, I think, helps people understand like, oh yes, she's very human. She's like me, we all are kind of going through this same thing. So yes, stay true to your beliefs and people will gravitate to you. When it comes to social media though, I that's where it's tricky. Like, I have never not used Instagram. I pretty much, that's how I, was putting my portfolio online since the beginning. I guess if you wanted to start your career, without using social media, it's pretty much just like emailing artists your website or your portfolio. But I strongly recommend using social media, even though it's like a double-edged sword, like emotionally. Just as I was saying before, it's easy to get sucked into believing likes correlate with good work. But I feel like as long as you kind of center yourself and say, nope, 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 my work is like decent no matter what anyone says, and I believe in it, then I feel like social media it's a great way to get your art out there. Yeah.
Have you, here's another question. Have you ever, I'm sorry, how do you deal with negative feedback, especially with the anonymity of social media? I feel like people can be especially vicious. And a similar question is just how do you manage reactions to your work?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. It honestly, yeah, it honestly brings me back to when I posted the campus illustration on Reddit, and oh my God, like so many people were just calling me a left-wing nut job and, trying to get at me. And there's certainly some unhinged people on the internet, to say the least. But how do I deal with that? I mean, honestly, it's depends on the day. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, like this person like hates me, whatever. If it's a leftist giving their opinion about my work, I tend to take it harder than if a conservative was critiquing my work, for example, because I'm making work for leftists, not necessarily conservatives. So if a leftist has something to say about my work, I'm a little sensitive. But as for being called names and stuff, I kind of let it roll off. And to be honest, like I've been fairly lucky. Like I there's no threats. I haven't had any doxing. I've been very lucky on that regard.
Yeah. Sorry, we're getting a lot. There was a question about, oh yeah. Chloe's asked, has a client ever twisted your words, or how would you handle someone manipulating your art like that?
A client has never like twisted my words. I would say the closest of that would be the college campus illustration. That's the closest I can really think of, where conservatives kind of like co-opted that. And when that happens, I just remember being like, oh snap, I need to like defend myself. Like this is not meant for conservatives. This is meant for leftists. But I mean, you can't really control how your art's going to be interpreted. So in that instance, it's kind of like the internet did the work for me. My name came out, and current affairs also was attached to the project. So once everyone kind of knew where the content was coming from, I didn't really, it didn't really have a problem. But yeah, I think that's the only example I can think of where client, not really a client, did that.
Right. Could you elaborate a little bit about Amazon? You didn't really show, you've done, I think, several cartoons about working at Amazon.
Yeah, so I don't have any cartoons on the slide. I probably should have added some of those. But it is on my Instagram page. One of the comics I did was pretty much a guy telling a horror story, and in the end the twist is, oh yeah, the horror is just the working conditions at Amazon, because they're just totally awful. So it's like, if I'm making content like that, like I just could never agree to work, and do illustrations for Amazon, for example, because it just totally doesn't align with my worldview.
You did another one about Google too, right?
Yes, so. I did. And I posted that and I was like, oh man, this is gonna like ruin every what is it? Any chance I had for a Google Doodle, but it's fine.
Emily asks, do you find your political work to be mostly cathartic, or does it ever feed into the feeling of constant outrage / burnout?
Hmm. Honestly, it's a little bit of both, if I'm being honest. I think, some of my favorite pieces have been done when it's because like I need to release an emotion. Um, and yeah, I just find that those are my most resonated with pieces. But there have been times where it's like, um, I remember I agreed to do a weekly comic strip for the Nib, and that was much harder than I anticipated because, a lot of the topics, even though they were even though I had an emotional connection with them, I wasn't like naturally inspired to do it. So I would have to do research weekly. I would have to find the article that I was like, okay, well, this kind of upsets me the most. So I'll do something on this, right? So that can lead to burnout because you're just looking at article after article of crappy things that happen in the world. So you just have to be careful and self-love and take care of yourself through the process because sometimes it can be really heavy. I don't know if that answered the question, but
It's a good start. Mingzhen asks, what do you find most interesting about creating art about quarantine?
About quarantine. I kind of am seeing quarantine political art as, this is going to sound kind of crappy. I kind of see it as being one noted a lot of the times. Like there's this, which is fine, right? It's kind of like humanity is experiencing this like general, like not hopelessness, but I guess disappointment in the government. They're experiencing a lot of the same emotions, like internationally. And so a lot of the quarantine art is kind of either focused on that or focused on like, oh man, I'm wearing sweatpants on a Zoom call. Like it's all relatable, similar experiences, but I haven't really seen much quarantine art that pushes like the boundaries, I guess. Um, Except, if journalistic stuff, I feel like is really interesting. Because it's not just like this general take on COVID. It's an actual story. It's an actual fact. So yeah, I would say journalistic depictions of quarantine have been like my favorite thing to read.
I just want to share some comments that several students are really appreciative of you bringing up memes because of their cultural significance. And then also showing that 3D, the Van Run 3D political piece, because we often think of political work as 2D. And another comment is, I really love how you point out that profit-driven motivations behind companies can often just be exploiting your experience.
Yes. And I feel so strongly about this. And like, I won't name names or whatever, but I've definitely been in plenty of situations where I was asked, and this is actually for my day job specifically. So it's interesting because I'm an animator on my day job and I make GIFs. So there was a client who was asking like, hey, we need to make like or essentially they asked me to make BLM content. And Juneteenth content specifically, actually. And part of me was real bitter about it. I was really bitter because it was like, oh, well, Juneteenth is just becoming a thing now. So of course corporations are going to be like, yeah, everyone has Juneteenth up. We need Juneteenth content. We need all this stuff revolving around Black culture that has existed before corporations even acknowledged Juneteenth. So the fact that, I had pitched that content months before my company took it on was strange to me. You know, it didn't really sit well. But yeah, that is definitely a struggle, kind of being like, yeah, I have to do this content, and also like this is a job. I have to kind of dissociate my politics from it sometimes. Yeah, it's tough.
We have several questions just about how you create. Let's see, could you explain if color plays a big factor in your cartoons, or how do you approach color in your work?
Wow. Yeah, honestly, color has been my weak link. It is my weakness. So normally I do my sketch, I do my ink, and then I kind of tackle what colors I'm going to use at the very, very end. And this is kind of just like the way I've always worked. But I mean, I'm just going to say color is dependent on the feel of the project. But yeah, I'm also, you know, to be fair, I'm also kind of an untrained artist in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't necessarily be able to give, you know, good color theory tips and things like that. But, you know, I pretty much rely on my eye for that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about the steps to your process? The question is, do you start with the meaning and then draw the idea, or is it the other way around? Or
yeah. So actually, this is like a good time to actually even talk about this other big project I'm working on. So I'm doing a book for Little Brown Books, and it's going to be a graphic novel. So they've been working with me in, you know, how I like to do things. So normally and even for political comics, so it's for the book and for political comics, my first step is writing almost like a screenplay. So I'll say panel 1, this is a text, and then I'll include a description of the imagery. And that's even how I pitch to the nib a lot of the time. So if you're interested in pitching to the nib, you know, having a general idea is good, but also pairing it with a description of what you'll draw is great too. And then after I have like all of my text down and edited and stuff like that, I'll move on to sketching, then inks, then color. And by the way, I do everything pretty much digitally on Photoshop. Yeah. I don't even think I like use paper and scan it. Like everything has been digital so far.
do you mind if I stop the share just so we could see you larger?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that okay?
Of course.
I'm sorry I didn't think of that sooner. Let's see. Can I stop it?
It's okay. I'm flattered you want an HD image of my face. Oh, here, let me stop.
Maybe there we go. Now we can see you. That's great. I have another question, but actually what you just brought up, Marissa asks if you have any advice about working digitally, since it seems to be how you primarily work. Any advice?
Working digitally. I'm not really sure. I would say, oh man. Yeah, I'm not sure really. I would say like there's been plenty of times where, you know, I was just drawing and then totally forgot to ask for dimensions of a piece, for example, which was like a nightmare. But I don't know, other than that, it's just like learning how to export your files properly and stuff like that was a journey. But I don't necessarily have any advice other than just like keep practicing, which is really, you know, lame advice. So I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. For those of us that may not know much about it, could you tell us a little more about the nib and also how you started doing work for them?
Yeah, sure. So the nib is a primarily like online site that it's almost like a collective. So it's run by a group of editors. It's run by Matt Bors. He's the head editor, and he hires a bunch of different cartoonists for political cartoons specifically, and they publish that every week. And they ask for, they could ask for strips, like single panel, multi-panel. I've done like really, really long form ones, like 30 plus panels. And oftentimes, one of my favorite things I do is journalistic comics. So yeah, and it's either like educational or political satire. But I encourage everyone to pitch to them, because they're nothing but super nice people, and throughout the editing process, they're also they're very helpful in steering you in the right direction for your vision too. So they'll say like, oh, we want you to edit this, but like if you think it's going off of what you want, then like you can argue against what we believe, like what our opinions are, essentially. So yes, the nib's great.
Could you talk a little bit about journalistic comics and how is that different or similar, or what is it? How do you work on that?
Yeah, so I've personally never done journalistic pieces, but I was part of a collaborative effort with Sarah Merk. Sarah Merk is the artist who also did the zines that I showed you on my slide. But she did a whole published printed book about Guantanamo Bay and the injustices that were happening in Guantanamo Bay. And she went there and interviewed people who were government officials in the US that were involved with it in some way, shape, or form. And after she had written down her experiences and the interviews, she then hired a bunch of cartoonists, me included, to do certain chapters. So I thought it was really awesome that I was essentially just illustrating a real person's story, a real interview. And it's just a totally different way to convey the news to someone in a way that I had never really seen before. So yeah, just a super cool type of comic making.
Still up for a few more questions?
Yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah.
A couple students want to know how do you draw crowds? Do you have any advice about doing that? How do you map out and figure out those crowd images?
Oh, like the actual drawings.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, this is crazy. I've never actually thought about it in detail before. Okay, honestly, how I started off like those Where's Waldo type crowd pieces is I'll draw the environment, like where they're going to be situated, and then I'll just find ways to cram as many people doing certain things as possible, and I'll do it in sections. So if I know I have to do like people surrounding the Mao Zedong statue, then I'll plan where I'm going to put that in relation to, let's say, like the sports stadium or another building. And it's essentially just a process of drawing things out, sketching until everything kind of looks right, and making sure, like, even though it's busy, it's also readable. I think that's really important too. So yeah, it's just kind of playing around till you get it.
Great. What do you feel is the best way to grow on social media, or how have you found success in it?
This one, honestly, it's me being like kind of stubborn and saying like, oh, well, I'm not gonna pay money to promote or whatever. And I haven't done that yet. I've almost fallen for it, I guess you could say, but everything has been organic since the beginning. Like I wanted to make sure I wasn't like paying per views, and that people really cared about what I was making. I didn't want to like delude myself. So I don't really have tips for that. I would just say like share your work. Connecting with other artists is super important because they'll share your stuff, and then their followers will share, will see you and start following you back. So political cartooning, again, like I said, is kind of a small sphere in a lot of ways. So eventually they're going to find you, if you're making political comics.
We have a question from YouTube. Anthony asks, how has political cartooning grown and changed since you entered the industry? Which wasn't that long ago, but it's been such there's such an intensity to political discussion and action right now. I would imagine there's been effects in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. I would say there's just been a huge shift to like social media specifically. Like when I was talking to some of the older cartoonists who had been in the game for like 20 years or more, they were like, yeah, well, I'm, syndication is getting really hard now. I am friends with Rob Rogers, who was working for the Pittsburgh Gazette, and he actually got fired because he was doing too many Trump cartoons, and the head of the Pittsburgh Gazette didn't like it, so he was, fired. And now he relies primarily on digital stuff, like his work being shared digitally. So if anything, I would say the trend is digital work, definitely memes, although like I don't know if memes would count. I feel like Matt Bors would be mad if I said that. But yeah, definitely everything is being digital.
We have another question from YouTube. Kevin asks, what advice would you give about balancing work life and personal life in this field? Especially if sometimes the workload can be demanding based on how many clients you have, right?
Yes. Yeah. Balancing work and personal. I would say that work tends to be an overwhelming presence in my life personally. It's just like I'm always working. I think the only saving grace is that I'm really passionate about the work I do, and that I try really hard to carve time for self-care and like mental health. So honestly, stretching and just doing simple things like taking a break and moving my wrist around and doing those stretches is like a night and day difference if I was just, chugging coffee and not moving for a solid 8 hours, which I have done, and I never recommend it. So yeah, just paying attention to how your body feels and how your mind feels, because frankly, if I'm just like reading articles about like BLM and the injustices, and even more than that, even Amazon, for example, just constant injustices, it just takes a toll. And sometimes you just have to like stop reading those things for a while.
Eliana asks, who are your influences when entering the art world, and have they changed?
Yeah, I would say at the beginning, because I was very much trying to be an editorial illustrator in that general sense. I was following a lot of Rune Fisker, Runfisker. He is a great editorial illustrator who I'm still obsessed with, even though I'm doing political stuff now. But yeah, I feel like I don't really follow him. I'm not as inspired by him anymore, even though he makes great work. I'm definitely gravitating towards, folks like Ben Passmore is an artist that I really like. He provides like a lot of historical context and figures, like W.E.B. Du Bois. And there was a comic he did where it was him having like a fake interview with W.E.B. Du Bois, and I just thought it was really cool how he was bringing historical characters, you know, into a modern day assessment of politics. So yeah. Is there any more artists that I should maybe do a shout out for? I'm not sure.
I'm sure there are. It's always hard to think of them in the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
There's a question: what is the biggest piece of advice you would give yourself 5 years ago? So I guess if you went back in time to yourself 5 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
Wow, it's really hard. I guess I would say that it's okay to not it's okay to take time to not make work for a client, because 5 years ago all I cared about was doing client work. Literally, I mean, I would do work for fun, but like it was meaningless. Like I was like, yeah, I'm not an artist until I get paid. That's the crap, isn't it? It's terrible to even think about, but that's what my headset was. Like, I can't call myself an artist until I get my first paycheck. And it's like, no, that's not true. Like, I was an artist before, and I didn't need a client to validate the fact that I was creating. So I guess that's what I would tell myself, that, you know, you're an artist, you know, you don't need anyone's permission to be one. So yeah.
Molly asked, have you ever created art just to escape that ended up being political?
Yeah, actually, it's really funny you say that, because there's one example. So last Halloween, I drew a fan art of the mystery gang from Scooby-Doo, of all things. And I was like, oh my God, what a fun Halloween themed thing. Except I participated in this hashtag. It was like hashtag Blacktober, where you kind of just like take classic cartoons and you make them, you know, black. You put, because, you know, growing up, you didn't see like black characters on TV. So I was like, wow, this is a really fun project. And I thought it was just super fun and awesome. And then I got a swarm of messages being like, this is appropriation of white culture. And, you know, if people whitewashed black cartoons, this would be terrible. And I just found myself in a position I had no idea I was going to be in. So that turned political. Like it wasn't like I even sought out, you know, you could even say unintentionally, you know, making white characters black is in and of itself kind of like a political statement. Like, I wish I saw more black characters on TV, but at the time it was just for fun. So yeah, that's a good example, I would say.
You find yourself wading into it, whether you mean to or not.
Yeah.
Marty asks, what is your bucket list dream project?
Oof, my bucket list dream project. Oh man. It's changed so much. I think I don't even really have one. I think it's like, because I've done so many different types of art forms, I can't really pick one. Oh, I would say like animation is so tedious that I definitely don't think that would be my passion project. I think it would be something large scale, like stuff I've done for current affairs. Just because like I love the details that go into that kind of stuff. So if anything, it would just be a big, detailed, super political piece that's for like, I don't know, an organization that I really, really care about, you know, and something that's impactful. But right now I can't even think of that. Is that, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the differences of working kind of in those larger kind of panoramic pieces that you do versus when you work in comics and it's broken up by panels? I mean, how do you, because it's very different. There's similarities, but it's very different in the narratives, right? In there.
Yeah. I would say I almost think about those large scale pieces almost like a mural, where I want the whole thing to be balanced visually. So it's like if I'm looking at, let's say, like the hellscape or even the Grifterland game board, I just wanted that to be like you didn't really know where you wanted to look at first because it was all just sprawled out in front of you. And that's totally like, it's night and day from if I'm just doing a panel comic where the focus is really on the text. So I want to highlight the bubble. The bubble's always on top and the characters at the bottom. Not that they're like secondary because they're just as important as the words, but I find that I can even treat the characters in that secondary type of way, like they're just not as important because people are just reading the panels. Like that's really what they're there to do. So on one hand, you have like a huge 2-page spread for current affairs that doesn't rely on text, and I can go crazy and put images everywhere. And then for the nib, if I'm doing a panel, the focus is on the words, the message.
I was going to ask you something else, and I completely lost my train of thought. Can you talk about like some of the references, picture references? Do you use them, or how do you do that research?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
I use them all the time, all the time. You know, it's so funny because I feel like every artist says this. I definitely said it. I was like, oh my God, I'm not a real artist because like I have to look up what a horse looks like in order to draw it. Like, I think that was like the stereotypical thing. It's like, who knows how to draw a horse? It's like, I need references for almost everything. It's just so helpful. Sometimes I don't, honestly. Like if I'm just drawing like a face or, you know, like shoulders up, then I don't usually need help. But even stuff like perspective, like I'll go on Google and, you know, search up reference photos for that all the time. So yeah, it's such a useful tool.
I remember my question now. When I was looking on Twitter around the campus piece, someone had posted and people were placing themselves in different parts of the campus. So it almost broke it up into panels. It was almost like reading it, you know, like a comic book in a sense, like I'm here, I'm in this place, you know. So
yeah,
it's creating sort of its own pathway through that. I have a new question. Do you think, this is from Abraham, do you think there's a stigma towards political illustrations?
Stigma. I would say not totally. And I also think it depends on the context because there's plenty of times where it's like, you know, people be like, oh my God, I'm on the internet. I just want to look at like, you know, memes and stuff. Like, I don't want to see politics, you know? So in that case, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of people who go on the internet to escape or like go on social media to escape politics. But I feel like nowadays you cannot escape politics. It's in everyday life. Like everyone has some sort of opinion about what's happening in the world. So I feel like the stigma is definitely not where it used to be. Like when I came out with the lowlights for children in 2018, I don't think people really liked it all that much. Like they were uncomfortable. But I feel like we're living in a very politicized era right now. So people are open to it. but yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a stigma so much.
Could you talk about the humor in your work and how its role in discussing issues, maybe? Or
Yeah. I yeah, I just find that it's not that it's like natural to come up with jokes, but it's almost like because things in society are so weirdly absurd sometimes and like so ridiculous, it's almost like, yeah, I make jokes with my family about it because it's like, oh, you know, to be honest, half the stuff that Trump did was a joke to me personally. It was like his hair was flying off, and there was just the jokes were essentially writing themselves, especially during his presidency. That it's like you can find little pieces of absurdity in those moments, and the joke kind of naturally comes out. And I also think that people really respond well to jokes, more so than like really sad posts, because if you just have like post on post like this terrible thing happened in the news today and like no one's getting their stimulus checks, it's like that just bums people out and could potentially cause readers to shut down and not interact with material. Whereas I feel like a political cartoon, it, even though it makes light of something, or it just points it out in a way where an audience member can be more engaged with it.
Do you think you ever stop making political art at some point, or are there other avenues that you see yourself growing into in addition to political work?
I feel like as long as I'm pissed about something, I'm gonna be making political art. It's just something that I just feel compelled to do sometimes. Like I'll just get up in the morning and be like, yeah, this is my next project. Like I'm compelled to do this. So I don't think that'll ever go away, unless I'm like super tired and I'm like, enough of this. But until that moment comes, like, yeah, I really do think this is something that I'm gonna pursue for a while. Yeah.
That's great. Well, make sure. No, I think you've been so great just answering all these questions. I feel like it's been this interview with you tonight, but I really appreciate you sharing yourself with us tonight. And everyone, please check out Chelsea's work. It's on chelseasaunders.me.
Yes.
And also on Instagram and the Nib. And it's really great to see her work, and it's really great to talk with you tonight. So thank you so much, and keep going. It's really good. Your work's really like helping me personally just get through what's going on. So
thank you so much.
Right, thank you, everyone.
Chelsea.
Yeah.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Oh, you're totally welcome. Like, actually, it was such a pleasure. So thank you for inviting me. Like, I'm very flattered.
Can't wait